She stands in the dusty auction yard, rage knotting her stomach as a ruthless millionaire discards 3 fragile foals like unwanted debris. If she dares to save them, she'll be forced into a battle that could shatter everything she holds dear. Under the scorching midday sun, a private estate sprawled across miles of manicured lawns and gleaming fences. The billionaire who owned this grand property prided himself on his champion horses, each specimen carefully bred to exude power and speed. Yet in a remote corner of the stable yard that afternoon, 3 newly born foals lay huddled against the straw, overlooked and unwanted. Their mother had passed shortly after giving birth, and the estate's owner, known across the region for his ruthless ambition, took one glance at their frail legs, scrawny frames, and trembling bodies before making his decision. He demanded they be removed, insisting he had no use for weak animals. A quiet stable hand watched in silence as the foals were carted away, their eyes wide with confusion. Word quickly spread among the staff that the millionaire wanted the 3 foals gone by sundown. Some whispered about it with pity, but no one dared contradict the man whose name carried such weight. Anyone who challenged him risked losing their job or worse. Most simply shrugged, convincing themselves that fragile animals stood no chance and it was better to dispose of them quickly. By mid-afternoon, an old trailer was backed into the stable yard, its metal ramp lowered with a hollow clang. 2 workers struggled to coax the frightened foals toward the trailer. The youngest, a trembling chestnut with silky lashes, let out a desperate whinny that echoed off the stable walls, but no one came to comfort them. The workers eventually forced the babies inside, securing the ramp as their eyes brimmed with anxiety. "Drive them out," the millionaire's voice boomed from a distance, never once stopping to examine them himself. "We haven't got time for lost causes." For all his success in business, compassion had no place in his heart. Surrounded by powerful stallions in prime condition, he had no patience for weaklings who might never make the cut. He saw them as a wasted investment, believing that culling poor stock was simply part of maintaining his empire. The trailer rattled along a country road, leaving the immaculate estate behind and heading toward a small livestock auction. The sun's rays beat down mercilessly. Inside that cramped space, the 3 foals tried to steady themselves on wobbly legs, each bump jolting them. Their frightened breaths mingled with the stale air, and occasionally one would nudge another as if seeking comfort from siblings who shared this bewildering fate. They couldn't know their lives were at risk, or that this journey might be their last. That same afternoon, 15-year-old Nicole was helping her grandfather unload supplies at the modest auction yard on the outskirts of town. Tall stacks of hay bales formed dusty rows, and the voices of sellers and buyers drifted through the balmy air. Although Nicole was used to seeing all sorts of livestock, she'd come for an entirely different reason that day: to deliver feed her grandfather had promised to a local farmer. Her modest life revolved around a small rescue farm, one that had never quite turned a profit but had saved dozens of animals. Though still young, Nicole possessed a resilience that belied her age, shaped by years of nursing abandoned creatures back to health. When the battered trailer arrived, Nicole happened to be behind the barns, stacking empty crates. She heard it before she saw it: the rumble of an engine that shuddered to a stop, the metallic groan as someone yanked open the trailer door. Muffled bleats of protest drifted out. It wasn't unusual for frightened animals to arrive, but something in those cries made Nicole's heart skip. She set down the crate and hurried around the corner. She reached the trailer just in time to see 2 men lowering the ramp. Inside, 3 foals stood frozen with fear, their tiny hooves trembling on the ribbed metal. Nicole's gaze swept across their delicate frames and scuffed coats. A wave of emotion washed over her. She could see they were only days old, their eyes unfocused and wide. The chestnut was the smallest, Nicole noticed how its flanks quivered with each panicked breath. Another had a dark bay coat that clung to prominent ribs, while the largest, a palomino, stood slightly ahead. Ears perked as though waiting for something or someone to guide them. "Are they for sale?" she asked quietly, though she already suspected the answer. The older man handling the trailer spat on the dirt, giving Nicole a gruff nod. "Owner wants 'em gone. We'll see if any fool's willing to bid." Nicole felt a flare of indignation. She knew how auctions went. If no one placed a bid, the animals would be sold off for slaughter or worse. Foals that couldn't stand on their own were rarely given a second thought. They had no immediate use, no promise of profit. In the hustle of daily trade, they'd be overlooked, deemed unworthy of care. Her grandfather, who had just finished unloading feed, approached with a curious frown. He followed Nicole's gaze and saw the frightened foals. The lines around his eyes deepened with concern. Nicole turned to him, her voice soft but certain. "Grandpa, we can't let them go like this." "They're worthless," one of the auction workers muttered, shaking his head as he secured the trailer. "No sense in feeding 3 that likely won't survive." The weight of those words pressed on Nicole's chest. She had grown up learning that every creature deserved a chance, and that the so-called worthless often carried hidden potential. If any of these foals had even the smallest spark of life, she refused to let it be extinguished so cruelly. Her grandfather looked into her pleading eyes and let out a low sigh. He, too, had seen animals no one believed could be saved. Sometimes they surprised everyone. Other times, heartbreak was the only reward for the effort, yet he'd passed on his philosophy to Nicole. "If you can help, you try." "Let's see what we can do," he murmured. Then he turned to the men who had hauled the foals. "What do they want for them?" The men shrugged. "They're going to auction, but trust me, we'll be lucky if anyone offers a dime." A flicker of determination lit Nicole's face. "Then we'll bid," she said, glancing at her grandfather. He reached into his pocket, pulling out a worn wallet, his eyes narrowing with silent calculation. Their farm finances were tight, but not beyond giving these little ones a chance at survival. "Put them on the list," her grandfather said to the workers. "We'll wait for the bidding." Though the older men snickered quietly, Nicole paid no mind. She moved closer to the ramp, speaking softly so as not to spook the frightened babies. "It's okay," she whispered, voice trembling with empathy. "We're not going to hurt you." The bay foal lifted its head slightly, and the chestnut let out another plaintive whinny. Nicole felt her heart twist. No matter how many animals she'd seen at their worst, the sight of newborns abandoned so callously never ceased to move her. A few hours later, when the formal auction began, the crowd paid little attention to the 3 foals. People were there for breeding mares, strong geldings, or seasoned workhorses. When it was time for the foals, the auctioneer barely bothered with theatrics. 3 young ones, motherless," he announced in a bored tone. "Do I have an opening bid?" Silence echoed through the barn. A handful of buyers offered dismissive glances. One coughed, another shifted from foot to foot. The man next to Nicole gave her a wry grin. "Going to waste your money, girl," he teased. Nicole's jaw tightened. She raised her hand, voice clear above the hush. $10! Some snickers rose. $10 wouldn't buy a saddle, let alone 3 healthy foals. But these weren't healthy, and Nicole knew it was both a blessing and a risk. They were unwanted, which meant her limited funds might suffice. The auctioneer's gaze swept the crowd. $10, do I hear 15? No one spoke. Someone at the back shook his head as if the idea was ridiculous. After a quick pause, the gavel came down with a dull thud. Sold to the young lady in front. With that final bang, the 3 forsaken lives belonged to Nicole. She trembled with a mix of relief and trepidation. Her grandfather put a hand on her shoulder. "You did it," he said softly, though his voice carried the concern of a man who knew how costly compassion could be. Now the real work begins. As Nicole finalized the transaction, the workers brought the foals from the holding pen. A wave of chatter rippled through the bystanders, many shaking their heads. What's she thinking? They'll never make it. Just a waste of hay. Nicole heard every derisive comment, but her resolve didn't waver. She had seen wonders happen when you mixed hard work with unshakable faith. The first step was getting the foals home safely. She and her grandfather had come in a small pickup, so she borrowed a friend's trailer at the auction yard, gently guiding the foals inside. Each looked so bewildered, too young to understand anything beyond fear and thirst. The chestnut stumbled trying to ascend the ramp, letting out a tiny bleat of distress. Nicole soothed it with a gentle rub along its flank. "Easy, little one," she murmured. "We'll take care of you." The ride to their humble farm took nearly an hour. Nicole sat in the trailer's open side compartment, not wanting to leave the foals alone. With every bump in the road, they swayed, clinging to each other in a fragile huddle. She stroked their manes, humming softly, hoping her presence alone might calm them. She thought of the stable she had prepared that morning, a small space with fresh straw, clean buckets for milk replacer, and soft blankets ready to keep them warm. It wasn't grand, but it was safe. When they arrived, the sun hovered low, painting the worn barn in hues of gold. Nicole led each foal, stumbling but alive, into the stall. They looked around with wide eyes, sniffing the corners as if searching for their mother. Nicole's heart ached, but she stayed steady. Gently, she presented a shallow pan of warm milk formula. The Palomino foal tested it with a tentative lick, then took a few sips. Encouraged, Nicole guided the others to drink. After ensuring they'd all had a chance at the formula, Nicole settled onto a wooden crate in the corner of the stall, watching them explore their new surroundings. She was keenly aware of the challenges ahead, the possibility of infections, the cost of vet visits, the sleepless nights that come with caring for such vulnerable creatures. But looking at their innocent faces, she felt a spark of hope. They'd been spared from a grim fate, and for that alone, she believed they had a fighting chance. As twilight deepened, her grandfather came by with a lantern, bathing the stall in warm light. He checked each foal, his experienced hands examining joints, hooves, and bellies. Softly, he sighed. "They're weaker than I'd feared," he said, meeting Nicole's worried gaze. "But we won't give up, will we?" Nicole shook her head, jaw set. "Never," she whispered. She moved to the chestnut foal, stroking its trembling shoulders. It gazed up at her with wide eyes, and for a fleeting moment, she thought she saw curiosity mingled with gratitude. She had no illusions. The road ahead would be long, and every day would test them. Still, as she watched those three fragile lives settle into the straw, she felt a fierce certainty flare in her chest. "We'll show them," she murmured softly, her voice carrying the seed of a promise that would grow in the months to come. "We'll show them all just how strong you can be." Nicole barely slept that first night with the foals in her care. Each time the slightest sound drifted from their stall, she jolted awake, half expecting to find a crisis, yet every check revealed them dozing or shifting uncertainly in the straw, little hearts still beating strong. Dawn broke in soft pink light, and Nicole finally roused herself for morning chores. She found her grandfather already by the stall, crouched beside the chestnut as it clumsily tried to stand. Even in that moment, the stark fragility was clear. Their coats remained dull, and their legs wobbled beneath the weight of existence. But when Nicole glimpsed the flicker of determination in their eyes, she felt her resolve intensify. Though she'd grown up on a rescue farm, this was Nicole's first time caring for horses so young without a mother to guide them. She carefully measured milk replacer into bottles, warming the formula to match their body temperature. One by one, she coaxed the foals to drink. The Palomino, sporting an ivory mane against its pale coat, seemed the boldest. It took the bottle with hesitant curiosity, then gulped hungrily once it tasted warmth. The chestnut remained timid, only sipping after Nicole stroked its muzzle and whispered encouragement. The bay, meanwhile, glanced around in wide-eyed apprehension before eventually succumbing to thirst. When they finally settled with full bellies, Nicole could only smile, relieved that they'd accepted this small lifeline. Her grandfather, a quiet but kind-hearted man, spent the morning inspecting each foal's hooves and listening to their breathing. "We'll need the vet soon," he said quietly, noting the risk of infection in such young, motherless creatures. Nicole nodded, well aware that veterinarian bills could skyrocket in a blink. She thought of her meager savings, money she'd earned from pet-sitting jobs or small crafts she sold at the local market. It wouldn't be enough, but she refused to let finances dictate their fate. "We'll figure something out," she answered, tucking a stray strand of hair behind her ear. "They deserve a chance." Her grandfather's gaze softened, pride mingling with concern. He pressed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. To keep them comfortable, Nicole cleared a larger corner of the barn, spreading soft bedding and layering fresh hay. She used spare wooden boards to block off any draft and borrowed a gently used heat lamp from a neighbor. By the time the makeshift nursery was complete, the foals dozed in relative peace. Occasionally, one stirred, letting out a low whicker that echoed through the old rafters. Nicole couldn't help but wonder if they were calling out for the mother they would never see again. She knelt beside them, resisting tears as the weight of their helplessness pressed on her heart. Yet she also sensed their resilience, a fragile spark that refused to be doused by misfortune. That afternoon, while her grandfather drove into town to arrange a vet visit, Nicole stayed behind to keep watch. She prepared another batch of milk, mindful of the feeding schedule for orphaned foals. Between feedings, she made time to clean stalls and tend to the other rescued animals, a lame donkey and 2 goats that roamed the property. These chores felt routine, yet her mind remained fixed on the new arrivals. Every 15 minutes, she peeked into their stall, ensuring they hadn't grown distressed. The chestnut, especially, seemed prone to trembling fits, as though even the air itself frightened it. Gently, Nicole placed a wool blanket over the foal's back, stroking its mane until the shaking subsided. Late in the day, the veterinarian arrived. "Doctor." Lawson was a middle-aged woman with warm eyes and a calm demeanor. She knelt with practiced care, examining each foal's heart rate, respiratory sounds, and hydration levels. Nicole hovered anxiously nearby, awaiting the verdict. Dr. Lawson frowned slightly as she inspected the chestnut's hind legs. "They're underdeveloped," she noted softly, giving Nicole a sympathetic glance. "All 3 could face complications, but this one is especially vulnerable. There's a risk of joint deformities if we don't intervene." Nicole swallowed hard, her chest tightening. She nodded slowly, steeling herself for whatever regimen Dr. Lawson prescribed, anything to keep the babies alive. When the exam finished, Dr. Lawson promised to send over instructions for specialized care. After the vet departed, Nicole's grandfather found her sitting outside the barn, hugging her knees. He quietly lowered himself onto the step beside her, waiting until she spoke. "I'm worried," she admitted, her gaze fixed on a faint ribbon of sunset across the fields. "What if we can't do enough? What if they don't make it?" He placed a gentle arm around her. "We can only do our best. Whether they make it or not, we'll have given them a chance." His voice was steadier than she felt, and for a moment, she allowed herself to lean into his assurance. The man had raised her on that principle: do what you can and never regret trying. That night, Nicole set an alarm every 2 hours to check on the foals. The small bell on her phone jarred her from half-formed dreams of galloping horses, the stable lights flickering to life each time she made her rounds. Each feeding was a test of patience, especially for the chestnut, which required gentle massaging along its jaw to trigger the suckling reflex. By dawn, Nicole's eyelids felt heavy as stones, but she smiled through her fatigue. All three had eaten, and none showed immediate signs of distress. Though exhausted, she moved about the barn with a sense of purpose. In their tiny, wobbling steps, she saw a determination that mirrored her own. In every shallow breath, she sensed hope. In the following days, the foals gradually adapted to their new world. The bay learned to accept the bottle without flinching. The palomino displayed surprising eagerness whenever mealtime arrived, and the chestnut fought valiantly to stand each morning. Nicole introduced them to the outdoor paddock once the vet cleared it, letting them bask in warm sunlight. She felt her heart swell whenever they ventured a few steps into the grass, uncertain but curious. Neighbors began dropping by, some bringing small donations of feed or well-worn blankets. Rumors of Nicole's dedication spread, and even those who had initially scoffed softened at the sight of her tireless devotion. A local news snippet featured a brief story on the girl who rescued 3 foals, yet not everyone was delighted. One afternoon, Nicole spotted the estate's manager skulking near the auction yard. Word had reached him that the 3 weaklings had been saved, and apparently his employer, the Millionaire, was irritated. He didn't like being contradicted or publicly shown to discard animals that others deemed salvageable. Nicole avoided the man, though she glimpsed his scowl when he spotted her. Her grandfather warned her to keep a low profile, reminding her that wealthy men sometimes used their influence to push back on those who challenged them. But Nicole couldn't imagine giving up now. The foals were growing stronger with each day, and she wouldn't let intimidation overshadow their progress. If anything, the lurking threat fueled her determination. Over the next week, Nicole poured her energy into a steady routine, waking before sunrise to prepare the foals' bottles and check their joints for any swelling. She practiced light stretches the vet recommended, coaxing the chestnut to move each limb gently. Though challenging, the work paid off. Each foal developed a stronger gait, legs stiff but no longer trembling beneath their weight. Nicole felt triumph blossom inside her each time she watched them frolic for a few steps, stumbling less each day. This fragile progress became her lifeline, a stubborn refusal to let these foals slip back into the shadows of neglect. They were hers now, and she was certain they would one day shine. In the weeks that followed, Nicole's life fell into a steady rhythm of tending the foals, studying for school, and maintaining her family's small rescue farm. Each day brought a fresh surge of hope intertwined with a hum of anxiety. The 3 young horses, still unnamed, as she believed they'd reveal their personalities soon enough, grew in cautious confidence. The palomino remained the most curious, often nudging the stall door in a playful bid to explore the yard. The bay, with its alert ears and quick glances, seemed more independent, stepping away from the group to test its footing on new terrain. Meanwhile, the frail chestnut clung to Nicole's side whenever she appeared, leaning into her touch as though drawing strength from her calm presence. While her grandfather handled the practical matters, fresh bales of hay, regular checkups, and incremental improvements to the barn, Nicole focused on nurturing each foal's trust. She sang softly while feeding them, believing her gentle voice could soothe whatever fears still lurked behind their brightening eyes. She brushed their coats with slow, deliberate strokes, mindful not to startle them. Every small success, like the chestnut walking without stumbling or the bay taking its first playful canter in the paddock, felt like a victory worthy of celebration. Yet a shadow hovered over these peaceful days. Rumors reached Nicole that the estate manager had been asking questions around town. Which vet was looking after the foals? Were they truly in good health? The whispers carried a slight menace, suggesting the millionaire might try to reclaim them if they proved valuable or otherwise caused trouble. Nicole's grandfather brushed off her concerns, saying that without formal ownership paperwork, the man had no legal claim to abandoned animals once they'd been auctioned. But Nicole couldn't forget the disdain in the manager's eyes, nor the arrogance that came from working for a man whose wealth opened any door. One crisp morning, Nicole was in the paddock, teaching the foals to accept a light halter around their necks. The bay resisted at first, tossing its small head and dancing sideways, but Nicole had learned patience from her grandfather. She coaxed gently, lowering her voice until the foal stood still. It took a few tries, but eventually the bay let her drape the halter across its pole, trembling only a little before letting out a soft sigh. Nicole rewarded that small surrender with a couple of sweet apple slices. The Palomino, watching keenly, allowed the halter more readily, as if copying its sibling's example. Only the chestnut shied away with lingering trepidation. Nicole murmured comforting words, letting her hand rest lightly on the chestnut's quivering side. "It's okay," she whispered. "No one will hurt you now." By midday, she was wiping sweat from her brow, determined to keep practicing despite her own fatigue. The sun hung high, its rays warm for an autumn day. Small successes here and there lifted her spirits, so she barely noticed the battered truck that rumbled up the dirt driveway. When she finally glanced over, she recognized the visitor as Jacob Reed, a local trainer known for helping rehabilitate troubled or neglected horses. He hopped down from the driver's seat, tipping his cap in greeting. "I heard about your 3 special projects," Jacob said, nodding toward the paddock. His voice carried a gentle rasp that spoke of countless hours working horses in dusty arenas. Nicole had met him once before when he helped her grandfather with a rescued mare that wouldn't accept a rider. "Figured I'd offer my help if you need it." Nicole studied him warily. Although Jacob had a decent reputation, she feared that any outside attention might risk drawing the estate's notice. But her grandfather, who emerged from the barn at that moment, seemed pleased. "That's mighty kind of you," he said, greeting Jacob with a firm handshake. "We're doing what we can, but these foals will need the right training once they're stronger." Jacob leaned against the fence, his eyes on the trio huddled in the paddock. They look better than the rumors suggested. Scuttlebutt around town was that they were too weak to stand. He paused, nodding as the bay took another few steps, halter dangling softly. "You've done fine work so far." Encouraged, Nicole guided the Palomino closer for him to inspect. Its slender legs still showed slight awkwardness, but the tremors of early days had almost disappeared. Jacob crouched slowly, letting the foals sniff his hand. "Good posture," he commented, running a practiced hand down the young horse's flank. "You've been on a careful feeding schedule, I see. Nice muscle tone starting up." It was a small validation, but it made Nicole smile. She explained how she'd been feeding the milk replacer every 3 hours, gradually introducing a specialized feed mix to build strength. Jacob listened intently, asking questions about each foal's behavior. He offered a few pointers about socializing them further, like short sessions walking in pairs or letting them explore new corners of the farm to increase their confidence. Over the following days, Jacob dropped by more often, sometimes bringing supplies or leaving behind a borrowed training tool. Nicole's grandfather was grateful for the expertise, though Nicole remained half suspicious. Something nagged at her whenever she recalled the estate's manager lurking around. Was it a coincidence that someone well-connected like Jacob would show interest now? Or was she being paranoid? She tried to push the doubt aside, reasoning that the Foals truly did need all the support they could get. Soon, a delicate bond formed between Jacob and the Foals. He had a knack for understanding their cues, nudging them toward trust without forcing them. Under his guidance, they learned to stand quietly when a rope brushed against their sides, and they started to accept the faintest tug on the halter as a suggestion rather than a threat. Even the chestnut, though still cautious, seemed less prone to anxious trembling when Jacob approached. Nicole stood close by, studying his method, committing each technique to memory so she could continue when he wasn't there. One afternoon, while Jacob was demonstrating how to help the Palomino practice stepping over low-ground poles, a sleek sedan appeared on the gravel drive. Nicole tensed immediately, intuition telling her this was no friendly visit. Sure enough, the estate manager, a tall, severe-looking man with perfectly combed hair, stepped out. He wore a polished leather jacket and surveyed the place with a thin-lipped frown, as if insulted by the farm's rustic simplicity. Nicole's grandfather walked over to greet him, posture stiff. "Can I help you with something?" he asked, voice polite but cold. The manager cast a cursory glance toward the foals, who'd scrambled to the far side of the paddock. "I heard your granddaughter took in 3 worthless colts," he said, phrasing it like an accusation. "My employer wishes to know if they're still alive." Jacob moved closer to Nicole, quietly placing himself between the manager's line of sight and the paddock. She noticed how the man's gaze slid to Jacob, then returned to her grandfather. "They're alive," her grandfather replied curtly. "And not for sale, if that's what you came to check." The manager gave a derisive snort. "Nobody said anything about buying. Mr. Renwick simply doesn't like having rumors floating around that he abandoned 3 viable foals. He wants to be sure you aren't making a spectacle of his decision." Nicole felt indignation flare in her chest. She fought the impulse to lash out, sensing her grandfather's unspoken warning to stay calm. In a measured tone, he responded, "The only spectacle here is that we took in animals your boss cast aside. If people are asking questions, that's on him." For a moment, a tense silence gripped the yard. The manager narrowed his eyes, as if memorizing every face. Then he turned on his polished heel, stalking back to the sedan without another word. The tires kicked up dust as he sped away, leaving behind a prickling sense of unease. Nicole exhaled only after the car disappeared down the road. She realized her hands were shaking. "He's never going to just leave us be, is he?" she muttered. Her grandfather laid a steady hand on her shoulder. "Let's not borrow trouble. Our job is caring for these foals. The rest, let them stew if they want." Jacob nodded in agreement, but a flicker of concern lingered in his eyes. He resumed the training session more quietly, guiding the bay with gentle commands. Yet Nicole couldn't shake the impression that the manager's visit was the first sign of a bigger conflict. Her intuition told her that the millionaire might not want these 3 so-called weaklings to become living evidence of his poor judgment. If the foals truly grew into healthy horses, it could tarnish the man's reputation for perfect stock. That evening, Nicole found herself leaning against the paddock fence long after dusk fell. She gazed at the silhouettes of the 3 foals, now drowsing under the faint glow of the barn's exterior light. The chestnut had nestled close to the Palomino, while the bay lay with its head on its sibling's flank. The gentle hush of their breathing reminded her why she refused to back down. "I'll protect you," she whispered, her voice catching in the still air. "No matter what." Inside, her grandfather prepared a late supper of soup and bread, glancing at Nicole with his well-worn mix of pride and worry. She had inherited his stubborn streak, but also his compassion. Together, they silently acknowledged that the path ahead might be fraught with confrontation. Yet for all the obstacles looming, the sight of those foals standing on stronger legs each day was enough to fortify their resolve. If the millionaire thought he could simply dictate who deserved life and who did not, he would soon learn that a determined girl and her resilient horses could surprise everyone. Nights grew longer as autumn cooled the air, and Nicole became increasingly protective of the three foals. Each time a strange car passed their farm's driveway, her heart would pound. She'd look up from her chores, half expecting the estate manager to reappear with a new scheme. But for a while, life stayed calm. The foals ventured with cautious curiosity around the farmyard, exploring corners of the paddock and nosing at wooden barrels or leaning fences. The chestnut, still the most timid, liked to graze at the very edge of the field, flicking its ears at every gust of wind. Nicole took careful note of each foal's temperament, learning their likes and dislikes the way friends learn each other's quirks. One misty morning, Jacob arrived earlier than usual. He parked his truck under the large oak by the entrance and headed straight for the barn, calling out a greeting to Nicole. She led him inside, where the foals had just finished their morning feed of specialized pellets and milk replacer. "They're getting stronger," she said, resting a hand on the bay's shoulder. "I can barely remember how frail they looked those first days." Jacob nodded. His gaze swept over their sleekening coats and the steadier stance of their legs. "They're filling out nicely," he agreed. "You've done a remarkable job." Her grandfather joined them, wiping his hands on a rag. "I was thinking," he began in his gravelly voice, "maybe it's time we start calling them by proper names. Could be they'd benefit from that sense of identity." Nicole's face lit up. She'd been holding off, afraid of naming them too soon, worried about heartbreak if anything went wrong. But now, the idea seemed right. They were past the danger zone, at least for the moment, and forging strong bonds with each passing day. She turned to the Palomino, whose creamy coat shone like an early sunrise. "Let's call her Sunny," she said, smiling at the thought of bright mornings and optimism. Jacob and her grandfather nodded approval, and the foal promptly nudged Nicole's hand as though pleased with the choice. Next came the bay, which had a naturally poised stance and seemed more adventurous than the others. "He's so quick," Nicole observed, recalling how he'd learned to accept the halter in record time. "How about Dash?" Jacob chuckled, snapping his fingers. "Sounds fitting." "He's always dashing around." The bay flicked an ear in their direction, as if acknowledging the new name. Finally, Nicole crouched beside the chestnut, whose wide eyes watched every movement but had begun to show trust in her presence. "She's gentle," Nicole murmured, stroking the soft muzzle. "And she has a kind of quiet fire inside. I was thinking, Ember." The foal exhaled a short breath, warm against Nicole's wrist. The name felt right, a spark of hidden strength that glowed beneath the surface. With their names decided, Sunny, Dash, and Ember, Jacob suggested a new step in their training. "They're old enough to start learning basic signals," he explained. "Little cues that help them connect with us and understand what we want." He set up a small pen beside the main paddock, hammering a few extra fence posts for safety. Each foal would spend short sessions with him, practicing walking in a circle, stopping on command, and tolerating gentle touch with ropes. Nicole assisted, always standing within sight to keep them calm. The sessions were brief, no more than 10 minutes at a time, but progress was swift. Sunny, ever the inquisitive one, needed constant reminders to focus instead of investigating every tuft of grass. Dash took to commands with a quiet acceptance, seemingly unbothered by the new expectations. Ember was hesitant but grew braver each day, especially if Nicole stood beside the pen, offering quiet reassurance. On weekends, neighborhood children would occasionally wander by, asking if they could see the miracle foals. Although shy, Ember particularly seemed to relax around gentle voices, as if the presence of curious kids reminded her that not all humans posed a threat. One little girl offered Ember a handful of sweet feed, giggling in delight when the foal snuffled it up from her palm. Watching these interactions, Nicole felt a surge of gratitude. The foals were blossoming into sociable, bright creatures, and she believed more strongly than ever that they were destined for something greater than just survival. Still, that sense of looming trouble never fully dissipated. One afternoon, a neighbor came by to warn them that the estate manager had visited his property, asking if he'd seen any illegally obtained livestock. The neighbor, a stocky farmer with weathered hands, scoffed at the notion, reassuring Nicole and her grandfather that no one could dispute the legality of the foals after they'd been auctioned. Even so, Nicole's stomach churned at the thought of a legal battle. She had no documents proving their mother was from the Millionaire's breeding line, only a crumpled receipt from the auction. Her grandfather's confidence that they had nothing to fear steadied her a little, but she doubled her vigilance. She kept the gate locked at night and made sure the barn doors were bolted. When she confided her worries to Jacob, he patted Sonny's neck and looked thoughtful. "I wouldn't put it past them to try something," he admitted. "A man with that much power hates public embarrassment, but as far as the law goes, you've got the bills of sale." He paused, giving her a reassuring grin. "And you're raising them better than anyone else ever could. That's got to count for something." She appreciated his unwavering support, though it didn't quell her apprehension entirely. Sometimes, in the middle of the night, she'd awake in a panic if she heard a strange sound outside. She'd hurry to the barn, only to find the foals peacefully asleep in their straw. With each passing day, the trio's personalities shone brighter. Sonny loved to nibble at the edges of Jacob's shirt, seeking attention, while Dash developed a mischievous habit of attempting to unlatch the paddock gate. Nicole caught him multiple times, muzzle pressed against the latch, flicking it with his lips. Ember remained more subdued, but when she galloped, her stride was surprisingly swift, her mane flying in the wind. Nicole sometimes stood by the fence just to marvel at it, how that frail, fearful foal had blossomed into a creature of grace and promise. Watching the three of them frolic, she felt an intense pride and protectiveness. The turning point came on a day drenched with the last golden warmth of autumn. Jacob was working with Dash in the training pen, gently urging the colt to trot at his side. Nicole was in the barn brushing Sonny, while Ember dozed in a patch of sunlight by the open doors. Suddenly, tires crunched on the gravel drive. Nicole's grandfather stepped outside to investigate, and within moments, Nicole heard the sharp tone of raised voices. She peered around the barn door, heart hammering. Sure enough, the estate manager had returned, accompanied by a well-dressed lawyer. They marched right into the yard, ignoring her grandfather's protests. The lawyer, thin-framed and severe, brandished a piece of paper. "We have a statement here," he announced, voice clipped with importance, indicating that these foals were unlawfully removed property of Mr. Renwick's stable. The manager shot Nicole a smug look, as though he'd won an argument. Nicole's grandfather took a step forward, arms crossed. "They were sold at auction," he retorted. "You abandoned them. There's nothing illegal about us purchasing cast-off animals." The lawyer sniffed. "That remains to be determined. My client asserts that these foals were never intended for open auction, and there may have been a clerical error." Jacob hurried over, leading Dash, who skittered nervously at the tension. The estate manager pointed at the colt, his voice dripping with scorn. "Those horses have Renwick bloodlines. He paid a fortune for the mare that birthed them. It's ridiculous to think he'd give them away for next to nothing." Nicole's anger flared. "He did more than that," she shot back, stepping forward despite the trembling in her limbs. He wanted them gone. He practically tossed them out like garbage. Now that they're healthy, suddenly he remembers their value. The lawyer's narrow gaze fell on her. "Miss, you'd be wise to watch your words. We have records indicating Mr. Renwick never consented to any final sale." Nicole's grandfather let out a humorless laugh. "That's nonsense. We paid at the official auction in front of witnesses." Shaking his head, the lawyer tucked away his paper. "We'll see what a judge says. For now, I'd suggest you prepare to relinquish the animals. Unless, of course, you're inclined to settle out of court." The manager smirked. "Name your price," he said, as though it was obvious everyone had a price. Nicole's cheeks burned. She glanced at Sunny and Ember, who'd edged closer inside the barn. Dash whinnied, unsettled by the acrimony. "They're not for sale," Nicole insisted. "They're my responsibility now." Jacob laid a hand on her shoulder, gently restraining her from stepping forward again. He spoke calmly, meeting the lawyer's stare. "If you've got a legitimate claim, file it, but intimidation won't work here." The lawyer gave a dismissive shrug. "So be it," he said, turning briskly on his heel. The manager tossed one last glare at the Foals before following him back to the sleek car. When the dust settled behind their vehicle, Nicole's grandfather exhaled sharply, turning to her with tight features. "They're bluffing," he muttered, though uncertainty flickered in his eyes. "At least I hope so." Jacob scratched the back of his neck, gazing at Dash, who had pressed close to him. "Renwick is known for using money and influence to get what he wants," he said grimly. "But the law's on your side, assuming your auction receipt is in order." Later that evening, Nicole pored over the crumpled papers in the farmhouse kitchen, verifying every detail of the transaction. It looked legitimate, complete with the auction house's seal. But fear gnawed at her, envisioning how easily a powerful man might twist facts or bribe someone to falsify records. Her grandfather tried to comfort her, suggesting they speak with a local attorney friend for advice. Jacob offered to reach out to a few equine rights organizations he knew, hoping they could lend expertise. In that moment, Nicole realized how much the Foals' fate had become entwined, not just with her own dreams, but with a cause bigger than her small rescue farm. If she gave in, it would signal that wealthy breeders could simply discard animals, only to reclaim them once someone else had invested love and effort. Despite her swirling worries, Nicole refused to consider surrender. Looking through the window, she saw the three foals in the paddock, evening light haloing their heads as they sniffed at the grass. They belonged here, she felt it to her core, and she would fight for them, no matter how many legal documents the millionaire threw her way. Ember caught her gaze through the fence and let out a soft nicker, as if sensing her turmoil. Nicole forced a smile, pressing one hand against the glass. "We'll stand by you," she whispered, "all three of you, no matter what." The days after the lawyer's threat felt like a slow-burning fuse, with tension simmering beneath each routine morning and evening. Nicole kept close watch on Sunny, Ember, and Dash, ensuring they remained healthy while she fretted over the possibility of losing them. She spent hours digging through every piece of paper related to the auction, rereading the small print to bolster her courage. Even though her grandfather insisted they had little to fear, she couldn't help envisioning men in suits arriving with official orders to confiscate the foals. At night, she dreamt of them being loaded onto a shiny trailer, their eyes pleading for her to intervene. Each time, she woke with a racing heart, determined to safeguard the gentle creatures who had captured her soul. Meanwhile, Jacob contacted an equine advocacy group he knew, hoping their experience might strengthen Nicole's case if the dispute landed in court. They offered to provide a statement explaining that once animals are sold at a recognized auction, the buyer holds legitimate ownership. Though that reassurance brought Nicole some relief, she remained wary. She had seen firsthand how wealthy individuals could spin narratives or exploit legal loopholes. Whenever Sunny trotted up to her, ears pricked with playful delight, Nicole felt an ache of determination. She wanted these foals to grow up free from the cold, profit-driven world they'd narrowly escaped. Each day, they grew more confident, following her around the paddock as though she were their guiding star. At night, Nicole often wondered if their new, growing bond could withstand Renwick's impending challenge. The promise of legal protection from the advocacy group encouraged Nicole to follow a stricter training schedule. If the case ever went before a judge, she wanted undeniable proof that these foals were flourishing under her care. She photographed Ember's first attempts at a smooth canter, documented Sunny's steady weight gain, and recorded Dash's progress halter training without resistance. In the evenings, she compiled these into a neat binder, half convinced that tangible evidence might dissuade the millionaire from pressing further. Still, a sliver of doubt gnawed at her. Men like Renwick rarely backed down just because someone showed them facts. Power wasn't about truth, but about bending it to fit their desires. That realization made her more determined than ever to keep forging ahead. Midway through the week, Dr. Lawson dropped by for a scheduled checkup. She examined each foal carefully, feeling joints, listening to heartbeats, and smiling at their improved condition. Ember no longer trembled when touched by strangers, and Sunny's coat gleamed with vitality. Even Dash, who had once been skittish during feeding, now allowed Dr. Lawson to lift each hoof. "You've done wonders," she told Nicole, scribbling notes on her clipboard. "A month ago, I would have given them slim odds. Now, I'd wager they have a bright future ahead." Nicole felt a rush of gratitude. It was one thing to see progress through daily contact, but another to hear it confirmed by a professional who knew the stakes. Her praise felt like a promise that their fight was worth every sleepless hour. The following evening, a local reporter arrived unannounced, camera in hand. She introduced herself as Mara, saying she'd heard rumors of a brewing legal scuffle over rescued foals. Nicole hesitated at first, reluctant to bring more publicity to a situation that already felt precarious. But her grandfather reasoned that public sentiment might be their strongest shield if Renwick pressed charges. So Nicole agreed to speak on the record, describing the day she found the terrified newborns at the auction and how they thrived after dedicated care. Mara snapped photos of Sunny, Ember, and Dash grazing peacefully. She even filmed a short video of Nicole gently guiding Ember around the paddock, highlighting how trust had replaced fear. "This is a story people will want to hear," Mara said. Nicole could only hope it would help rather than incite more conflict. Within days, the local newspaper published an article under the headline, "Orphaned Foals Caught in Legal Battle." Mara's piece highlighted the stark contrast between the animals' initial abandonment and their newfound vitality. Photos showed Sunny's pale coat shimmering under the sun, Ember pressing her muzzle against Nicole's hand, and Dash looking proud in his halter. The story caught the community's attention, drawing both praise for Nicole's perseverance and skepticism about the estate's intentions. Letters to the editor began pouring in, some condemning the millionaire for heartlessly discarding weak stock. Others praising Nicole's courage in standing up for creatures who had no voice. In a small town like theirs, such a controversy could quickly escalate. No one realized just how swiftly tensions would rise. A few evenings later, a dusty SUV pulled up as twilight settled over the farm. Nicole tensed, stepping onto the porch to see who had arrived unannounced. To her relief, a friendly face emerged. Mr. Grayson, the retired rancher who'd once offered wise advice about uncovering Phoenix's past. Though that had been a different horse, in a different story, he remained a pillar of calm wisdom for anyone facing equine troubles. "Heard you might need a friend," Mr. Grayson said, patting his hat against his leg. He carried a folder under one arm and spoke quietly as Nicole's grandfather invited him in. Over mugs of coffee, he explained that he'd dug around for any prior complaints or controversies involving Renwick's estate. He believed knowledge was the best weapon they could wield. Mr. Grayson's discoveries were troubling. According to scattered reports, Renwick had a pattern of disposing of horses that failed to meet his standards, though he rarely faced consequences. More than once, employees who complained found themselves fired or discredited by the estate's lawyers. "He keeps everything quiet," Mr. Grayson said, sliding documents across the table. Newspaper clippings showed small-scale protests that never gained traction. One incident involved a pregnant mare left in deplorable conditions until local advocates intervened. Yet each time, Renwick's legal team crushed opposition with money and threats. Nicole's hands shook as she flipped through the pages. She glanced at her grandfather, seeing his jaw tighten. This was the battle they were up against. Still, neither she nor her grandfather had any intention of surrendering. In the midst of these revelations, Nicole continued training sessions with Jacob's help. The foals sensed her lingering tension, occasionally skittering at sudden noises, but they remained trusting enough to keep learning. She introduced them to simple obstacles, like stepping over low rails or walking over tarps. Sunny, true to her name, approached every challenge with bright curiosity. Dash sometimes snorted at unfamiliar objects, yet he always rallied after a moment's hesitation. Ember was the most cautious, pressing her nose against each new surface as though testing its safety. Through it all, Nicole found solace in their progress. When Ember finally trotted confidently over a crinkling tarp, Nicole felt a swell of pride that momentarily eclipsed her worries. In those precious minutes, the future felt wide open. That evening, as the sun dipped behind rolling hills, Nicole and her grandfather gathered outside the barn. The foals dozed together in a warm huddle, unaware of the storm swirling around their existence. A soft breeze carried the scent of hay and the lullaby of crickets, giving the farm a momentary sense of tranquility. Nicole sighed, remembering the weight of Mr. Grayson's file on the kitchen table, filled with evidence of Renwick's cruelty. Yet here, in the dusk's golden light, all she could see was hope incarnate in 3 growing horses. "We'll see this through," her grandfather said quietly, resting a hand on her shoulder. "They're counting on us." Nicole nodded, eyes shining with resolve. She would guard their futures, no matter the cost to herself. A hushed stillness settled over the farm early the next morning, broken only by the soft rustle of trees bending under a light breeze. Nicole slipped out of bed before dawn, her heart pounding with fresh determination. She wouldn't let fear rule her day. Pulling on a faded jacket, she headed outside, moving quietly so as not to wake her grandfather. In the pale blue light, the silhouettes of Sunny, Dash, and Ember stood by the fence, ears pricked at her approach. She smiled, grateful they still found comfort in her presence. Inside the barn, she gathered their feed with practiced efficiency, a special blend to support their joint health and boost muscle development. As she portioned out the feed, thoughts of Renwick's looming legal claim weighed on her. All the while, memories of the previous night's conversation with Mr. Grayson and her grandfather replayed in her head. They had decided on one thing: be proactive. Instead of waiting for the estate's next move, they would meet with a local attorney and prepare their defense. Despite the knot of anxiety in her stomach, she felt a spark of hope. If Sunny, Dash, and Ember had taught her anything, it was that the will to fight could turn even the bleakest circumstances around. After breakfast, Nicole and her grandfather drove into town for their meeting. They left Jacob in charge of the Foals, who readily agreed to watch them. The drive felt oddly surreal. The town's streets looked unchanged, yet everything in Nicole's world felt shaken. People bustled in and out of storefronts, oblivious to the tensions swirling around the rescue farm. At a small brick building labeled Cromwell and Partners, they were greeted by a young receptionist who led them into a modest conference room. There, they met Ms. Davenport, a soft-spoken but sharp-eyed attorney recommended by Mr. Grayson. Ms. Davenport wasted no time inquiring about every detail of the auction, from the moment Nicole saw the 3 foals to the exact wording on the receipt. She studied the copies of Dr. Lawson's health records and the training photos Nicole had painstakingly assembled. "These documents are compelling," she said, tapping the stack with a pen. "They show clear evidence of a legitimate purchase followed by thorough care. Renwick's team can claim a clerical error, but they'd need solid proof. Judges don't look kindly on sellers who discard animals and then decide they want them back once someone else invests in their welfare." Still, Miss Davenport didn't sugarcoat the situation. Renwick could drag this case out, filing motions and appeals until Nicole's resources ran dry. She urged them to remain calm, to keep impeccable records, and to avoid any confrontation that might paint them in a negative light. Before they left, Nicole took a deep breath and asked the question that haunted her. What if he bribes the auction house, or finds someone to alter the records? Miss Davenport's expression turned serious. "We'll cross that bridge if we come to it," she said. "For now, trust in the paper trail. You acquired these foals legally, and you have the community's support." They thanked the attorney, stepping back into the autumn sunlight with a cautious sense of relief. Nicole's grandfather nodded approvingly. "She seems honest," he remarked, starting the truck. "We'll do what she says, keep our heads down." Nicole agreed, though she remained on edge. Renwick's influence felt pervasive, like a cold draft seeping through unseen cracks. Back at the farm, they found Jacob in the paddock with the foals, calmly guiding them through a new exercise. He'd placed a few cones in a line, teaching them how to navigate obstacles in single file. Sunny pranced at the front, tail swishing. Dash followed dutifully, ears flicking between curiosity and attention to Jacob's cues. Ember lagged slightly, but each time Nicole's voice drifted over the fence, the chestnut perked up and hastened forward. Their progress tugged at Nicole's heart. These once fragile babies now displayed playful confidence and a willingness to learn. She felt more certain than ever that taking them away from this environment would be an act of cruelty. After dinner, as dusk settled, Nicole retreated to the barn's loft with her notebook. The loft was her quiet refuge, a place where she could reflect without interruption. She could see the moon rising through a narrow window. Every so often, she heard the gentle snorts of the foals below, comforting in their steadiness. She began jotting down a list of next steps, records to update, photographic evidence to compile, statements from friends who had witnessed the early days of the foal's condition. She also scribbled notes about training benchmarks, hoping to show any skeptic that the horses were thriving under her dedicated care. Partway through her list, Jacob's voice called from below, "Nicole, mind if I come up?" She hesitated, then invited him. He climbed the creaking ladder with a cautious step, carrying 2 steaming mugs of tea. Handing one to her, he settled on a bale of hay. They sat in companionable silence a moment, the night air thick with the scent of straw and the faint whistle of wind outside. "I just want you to know," Jacob said eventually, "whatever happens, I've got your back. These foals mean a lot to me too. Seeing them grow is like proof that second chances aren't just fairy tales." Nicole nodded, her gaze dropping to the pages of her notebook. "I appreciate that," she said softly. "Some days it feels like we're taking on a giant." Jacob sipped his tea. "We might be. But folks around here love a good underdog story. And those foals, they're the ultimate underdogs." A small smile curved Nicole's lips. "I guess so," she murmured. "Let's just hope the courts see it that way too." The following week, Ms. Davenport submitted preliminary paperwork to formally assert Nicole's ownership of Sunny, Dash, and Ember. The strategy was to go on the offensive, clarifying that she was prepared to defend her rights if Renwick filed suit. She also arranged for statements from Dr. Lawson and from the local advocacy group. Tension around the farm eased slightly with each sign that they had a solid plan. Nicole poured her energy into training, pushing the foals' boundaries just enough to build confidence without overwhelming them. Whenever she watched them play, she noticed how their personalities blossomed with each passing day. Sunny was fast becoming the ringleader, trotting ahead with a bold spirit that enticed the others to follow. Dash balanced that exuberance with a calm presence, as though he'd matured faster than his siblings. Ember remained cautious, but every so often, she'd break into a joyful sprint, her hooves barely touching the ground. It was a sight that drew Nicole's grandfather to the fence line, where he'd lean, smiling at the transformation. But the fragile peace shattered one afternoon when a black sedan pulled up once more. The estate manager stepped out, accompanied by a different man, taller, with graying hair and an air of authority. Nicole's heart jumped. She recognized him as some kind of official, though she couldn't place his role. She watched them confer briefly, then stride toward the paddock. Her grandfather halted them at the gate, arms folded. "You're trespassing," he said in a clipped tone. The manager sneered. "We're here to inspect the animals. This is Mr. Jenkins, a representative of the State Agricultural Board. He has every right to assess their condition." Suspicion flared in Nicole's mind. Renwick's influence must have reached state officials. Jenkins nodded politely but avoided eye contact. "There's been a complaint about potential cruelty," he stated, voice subdued. "I'm required to investigate," Nicole bristled, stepping forward. "Cruelty?" she echoed, astonished. "We've got a vet's endorsement. These foals are healthier than ever." The manager's smirk deepened. "We'll just have to see, won't we?" With obvious reluctance, Jenkins followed Nicole and her grandfather into the paddock. Sunny, Dash, and Ember retreated at the unfamiliar presence, pressing against the far fence with a nervous shuffle. Jenkins approached, taking perfunctory notes as he glanced over the foals. "They appear well-fed," he conceded, "but the complaint alleges that they're being exploited for publicity, potentially placed under undue stress for local promotion." Jacob, who'd come running at the commotion, let out a hollow laugh. "Publicity? They barely leave the farm. We only started training them a few weeks ago." The manager shrugged. "Our lawyers have cited news articles where these horses were highlighted. Could be argued they're being used as showpieces before they're physically ready." Nicole felt a surge of indignation. "We're not parading them anywhere," she snapped. "We're simply caring for them." Jenkins lifted his hand to calm her. "Ma'am, I just need to verify that there's no basis to the complaint." This is standard procedure. With Nicole's permission, he snapped a few photos while the manager looked on, arms crossed smugly. Ember watched the entire scene with ears pinned back. Sunny whinnied, clearly sensing the human's hostility. Heart pounding, Nicole gently coaxed each foal to stand still while Jenkins took notes. Her cheeks burned with anger, but she stayed quiet, determined not to show weakness in front of the manager. When Jenkins finally finished, he looked vaguely apologetic. "I see no obvious signs of neglect," he admitted. "I'll file a report stating conditions appear satisfactory." The manager's confidence wavered, but he shrugged as though unconcerned. "We'll pursue further steps if needed," he warned, striding away. Jenkins offered a slight nod, then departed in the same sedan. Once the car vanished down the road, Nicole sank to her knees in relief, reaching out to steady Ember, who nudged her shoulder in empathy. Jacob exchanged a troubled look with her grandfather. "They're not giving up," he said grimly. "They'll do anything to paint you as incompetent or unethical." Nicole swallowed hard, tears prickling her eyes. She didn't dare let them fall. "We'll fight," she whispered, rising slowly. Her grandfather placed a reassuring hand on her back. "Darn right we will," he said. "If they think we'll fold under pressure, they've grossly underestimated us." Nicole could only hope that determination would be enough to shield Sunny, Dash, and Ember from the shadows closing in. From the moment the sedan disappeared, tension clung to every corner of the farm. That evening, Nicole hardly ate her dinner, too consumed by the latest tactic from Renwick's camp. Though the agriculture official had found no evidence of mistreatment, she feared they'd fabricate another excuse to pry the foals from her care. She absently stirred her soup, mind racing with scenarios of forged documents or surprise visits. At one point, she glanced out the window, expecting to see headlights creeping up the driveway. But only the steady glow of the barn lights interrupted the darkness. After the meal, she and her grandfather laid out the situation for Jacob, who stayed for coffee. Nicole's grandfather rubbed his temples, frustration etched into the lines of his face. "I've never dealt with anyone so determined to cause trouble," he muttered. Jacob offered a faint, reassuring nod. "They're desperate. The longer you keep the foals healthy, the worse Renwick looks for discarding them. It's no wonder they're grasping at straws." Nicole took a breath, steeling herself. "Then we'll keep showing they're thriving. If that means more inspections or more paperwork, so be it." By the time Nicole went to bed, the autumn sky had filled with silver stars that seemed both comforting and distant. She tossed and turned for hours, drifting into dreamless intervals, only to awaken at the slightest noise. When the first pink of dawn nudged through her curtains, she rose with a weary sigh and dressed quickly. She wanted to check on the foals, to ground herself in their warm presence before worry consumed her day. The cool morning air pricked her cheeks as she trudged outside. At the paddock fence, she paused, watching Sunny, Dash, and Ember stir in the gentle light. Their breath formed soft clouds in the crisp air. Seeing them safe and calm renewed her resolve. With renewed focus, Nicole doubled down on training. Under Jacob's guidance, the foals began short sessions of lead rope work around the yard. They practiced standing patiently while being groomed, lifting their hooves for cleaning and responding to gentle pressure. She marveled at how swiftly they caught on. Sunny stood so still that Nicole could run a brush across her back without a flinch. Dash let Jacob handle his feet with minimal fuss. Ember, though still the most cautious, accepted daily progress that would have been unthinkable just weeks before. It felt like forging a fortress of trust, one that no legal threat could easily breach. News of the harassment circulated through the local community. The same neighbors who once doubted Nicole's choice to adopt 3 worthless foals now rallied behind her. Some dropped off feed or offered free labor, mending fences or cleaning stalls. Others left encouraging notes or small donations to help offset potential legal fees. Even the local newspaper followed up with a second story, highlighting the Agriculture Board's surprise visit and the lack of any wrongdoing. "Fighting for foals, teen faces off against wealthy breeder," the headline read. Though Nicole squirmed at the publicity, she knew every bit of positive coverage could deter Renwick's aggressive maneuvers. One afternoon, Ms. Davenport called with an update that both soothed and unsettled Nicole. "They've filed a formal complaint in civil court," she said over the crackling phone line. "They're claiming the initial auction sale was invalid and that you're refusing to return property that rightfully belongs to Mr. Renwick's estate." Nicole's throat tightened. "So it's happening," she murmured. "They're taking us to court." Miss Davenport's voice remained calm. "Yes, but they'll need concrete proof. We'll file a counterclaim reaffirming your legal purchase. I'll send you a list of documents to prepare, everything from the vet's reports to bank statements showing your auction payment." Nicole braced herself, pen in hand, as she jotted notes. Despite her nerves, she felt a flicker of relief that at least the situation was coming to a head. Living in fear of an unknown confrontation was worse than facing it head-on. That evening, she worked late in the farmhouse kitchen, poring over receipts and statements. Her grandfather sat across the table, sifting through old files and records. Occasionally, he'd slide a document her way or grunt in frustration at misfiled papers. The overhead lamp cast warm light on their determined faces, and in the corner, the radio played softly, a gentle melody that eased the strain of their task. After hours of sorting, they gathered a tidy stack of evidence Miss Davenport had requested. Nicole glanced at the clock. Nearly midnight. She felt exhaustion tug at her eyelids, but refused to sleep until certain everything was in order. The next morning, a surprising message greeted them on the answering machine. The local community center wanted to host a fundraiser to assist with legal costs. "I suppose the reporter's articles inspired folks," her grandfather observed, pressing play again to re-listen. Nicole felt her chest tighten with emotion. She'd never expected such a wave of support. "We should accept," Jacob said, leaning in the doorway. "You're not alone in this fight, and the world should know it." Though proud, Nicole nodded. Money wasn't the only solution, but every bit of help meant they could hold out longer, no matter how Renwick tried to bury them in court fees. The fundraiser was scheduled for the following weekend, an event promising family activities, a silent auction, and a chance for visitors to meet the Foals, if Mrs. Davenport approved. Nicole felt a ripple of excitement mixed with trepidation. She wanted people to see Sunny, Dash, and Ember thriving. But she also worried about exposing them to too much chaos. Ultimately, Miss Davenport encouraged the idea, reasoning that a well-attended public display of the foal's good condition would counter Renwick's accusations. "Just keep it low-key," she warned. "No flashy stunts or big claims. Show them healthy and loved, and let the crowd draw their own conclusions." For the next few days, the farm bustled with preparation. Neighbors hung handmade banners proclaiming, "Support the Foals," and "Every life deserves a chance." Local bakers promised goodies for sale, and children volunteered to run simple games or help guide visitors. Nicole and Jacob planned a short demonstration where each foal would walk calmly around the yard, illustrating their progress. On the eve of the event, as she placed fresh straw in the stalls, Nicole couldn't help recalling the day she first saw them at auction, helpless, trembling, and alone. Now, they sparkled with vitality and curiosity. It was a transformation she hoped no judge or lawyer could ignore. When the morning of the fundraiser dawned, a crisp breeze carried the scent of baked goods and hay. Cars lined the dirt road outside the farm, and families strolled in, many wearing bright smiles. Eager kids craned their necks to catch sight of the foals, while volunteers sold raffle tickets and homemade crafts. Nicole moved through the crowd, greeting people, constantly aware of Sunny, Dash, and Ember's comfort level. The three foals stayed in their paddock at first, sniffing at visitors who approached the fence. A few times, Ember startled at sudden laughter, but Nicole hurried over with a calming hand, praising her bravery. The gentle approach paid off. Soon, the chestnut let curious children stroke her mane. Midday brought the highlight. Nicole and Jacob led the foals into a roped-off area for a brief demonstration. Sunny pranced in the lead, mane catching the sunlight. Dash walked confidently beside Jacob, responding to gentle cues. Ember needed a bit of coaxing, but once Nicole whispered reassurance, she settled into a steady walk, ears flicking to catch the crowd's murmurs. Applause rippled as onlookers marveled at how far these once overlooked babies had come. Nicole spotted her grandfather in the crowd, arms folded and eyes shining with pride. She almost forgot about Renwick's threats in that moment, lost in the shared admiration for the trio's spirit and resilience. After the demonstration, Nicole guided the foals back to their stall for rest while the fundraiser continued. Back at the farm's makeshift event area, she noticed a local news crew interviewing visitors. People praised her dedication, describing how the foal's story had touched their hearts. Eventually, a reporter waved Nicole over. Though shy, she agreed to speak. "What do you hope this event accomplishes?" the reporter asked, microphone extended. Nicole steadied herself, mindful of Mrs. Davenport's caution. "I just want people to see that these foals aren't commodities or castaways," she answered. "They're living beings full of potential. Money or prestige shouldn't dictate who gets a chance." Later in the afternoon, just as she finished helping at a bake sale table, Nicole overheard hushed voices near the barn's side gate. She followed the sound to find the estate manager skulking by the fence, phone in hand, observing the event with a sour expression. Her heart lurched. He must have come to spy. She stepped forward, blocking his view. "This is private property," she said sharply. "You're not welcome here." He slipped the phone into his pocket, forcing a tight smile. "Public event, miss," he countered. "Your little spectacle is drawing quite the crowd." "I'm simply curious." Nicole's voice trembled with anger. "You've got your civil suit," she reminded him. "Don't try to rattle us." The manager lifted his eyebrows, feigning innocence. "Rattle you? I wouldn't dream of it. Just remember, the more you put them on display, the more it appears you're using them for personal gain. That won't look good in court." Before Nicole could retort, the man turned and strode off, slipping away into the throng. She stood there, pulse pounding, trying to steady her breathing, even on a day meant to celebrate hope. Renwick's shadow loomed. The fundraiser ended on a high note. Families left with smiling faces and new appreciation for rescued animals. Organizers announced they'd raised a sizable fund to help with legal costs. Nicole's grandfather clapped her on the back, beaming despite the tension. "We won't let them twist this into something ugly," he said firmly. Nicole nodded, grateful yet still shaken by the manager's insinuations. Her gaze drifted to the paddock, where Sunny, Dash, and Ember dozed after the excitement. "They're worth every fight," she whispered, her voice trembling with both fear and love. As the sun dipped behind the barn, casting long shadows across the yard, Nicole squared her shoulders. The day had proven their community would stand beside her. Now, she had to find the courage to see this battle through, no matter how many times Renwick's men lurked at her gates. The days following the fundraiser felt like walking a tightrope between triumph and looming dread. On one hand, the event had been a warm outpouring of support. Neighbors still dropped by with words of encouragement, and local radio stations discussed the inspiring story of 3 foals who'd narrowly escaped a tragic fate. On the other hand, Renwick's estate manager had reared his head again, reminding Nicole that the legal fight was far from over. Each morning when she stepped outside to feed Sunny, Dash, and Ember, She braced herself for more unwanted visitors. Meanwhile, Ms. Davenport moved swiftly with the legal paperwork. She forwarded copies of the fundraiser's promotional materials and photos showing how the foals were kept safe and healthy throughout the event. "We'll argue that you're using community support, not exploiting the horses," she said firmly over the phone. "Renwick's team may claim otherwise, but the proof is in the documented care and the vet reports. Keep updating your records daily, no matter how small the detail." Nicole followed that advice meticulously, logging every feeding, every grooming session, every casual inspection of hooves or coat. It was tedious, but she felt more secure having tangible evidence of her dedication. Late one afternoon, Nicole stood in the yard watching the foals graze. Autumn had deepened, painting the trees with vibrant oranges and yellows. The crisp air carried a faint hint of the winter to come. Sunny munched contentedly, lifting her head occasionally to look at Nicole with bright, alert eyes. Dash wandered near the barn, investigating a pile of hay bales with quiet curiosity. Ember, as ever, stayed closer to Nicole, as though finding reassurance in her presence. Whenever a breeze rustled leaves across the ground, the chestnut would spook just a bit, legs tensing in readiness to bolt. Yet Ember didn't actually run. She'd flick her ears toward Nicole, waiting for a soft word or a gentle pat to restore her calm. Nicole felt a swell of pride at how far Ember had come. Once trembling at the slightest movement, she now handled new situations with growing confidence. It made Nicole marvel at the capacity for healing in these animals, if only someone believed in them. In that moment, her phone buzzed in her jacket pocket, interrupting the quiet. She glanced at the screen. Miss Davenport. Her stomach knotted. Legal calls seemed to come only with bad news lately. "Nicole," the attorney said, tone measured. The other side filed a motion to expedite the case. They're pushing for an immediate court date. Nicole's grip tightened on the phone. "What does that mean?" she asked. "Are they trying to catch us off guard?" Miss Davenport exhaled softly. "Precisely. They're arguing that the horses are evidence and need to be secured before further damage is done. Essentially, they want the court to order you to hand over the foals to a neutral party pending trial. It's a common tactic to put pressure on us." Nicole's pulse spiked. "Hand them over. No, no way." She could hardly form the words. The mere idea of letting those precious animals out of her sight twisted her insides. "Calm down," Mrs. Davenport urged. "I'm contesting the motion. We have proof the foals are in excellent condition, and no neutral entity could care for them better than you. The hearing is set for next week. I need you and your grandfather to be ready." Nicole let out a shaky breath. "We'll be there," she said softly. "We're not surrendering them without a fight." That evening, as the sky darkened, Nicole gathered her grandfather and Jacob in the farmhouse kitchen. Over mugs of steaming coffee, she relayed Ms. Davenport's update. Jacob's eyes flashed with anger. "They want to yank them away just because they can't stand looking bad. Unbelievable," he muttered. Her grandfather clenched his jaw. "Let them try. Those foals deserve to stay with the people who saved them." Still, the worry in his gaze mirrored Nicole's own. He cleared his throat and grabbed a pen, jotting down a fresh list of steps to fortify their case. "More photos, more veterinary endorsements, anything we can present to show the court they belong here." The next week became a flurry of preparations. Dr. Lawson visited again, offering to provide updated health exams. The local newspaper ran yet another story, this time headlined, "Legal Showdown Approaches for Miracle Foals." Readers penned letters denouncing Renwick's estate, accusing the billionaire breeder of trying to reclaim innocent lives only after someone else's hard work restored their health. Students from Nicole's high school organized a small protest outside the county courthouse, brandishing homemade signs that read, "Horses before greed" and "Foals aren't property." Through it all, Nicole tried to remain steady for Sunny, Dash, and Ember. They could sense her tension, crowding around as if seeking comfort. When she brushed Ember's coat one evening, the foal pressed her muzzle against Nicole's shoulder, exhaling warm breaths. It felt like a silent gesture of trust and a plea for protection. The weight of that responsibility crushed Nicole's heart at times, but it also strengthened her resolve. If these foals stood any chance, it was because she refused to let them slip back into the callous hands that discarded them. Finally, the morning of the hearing arrived. The sky was grey, spitting cold rain as Nicole and her grandfather stepped out of the pickup truck in front of the courthouse. Ms. Davenport waited on the steps, portfolio clutched under her arm. She greeted them with a reassuring nod, though Nicole noticed the slight crease in the attorney's brow. Inside, the courthouse was a maze of tiled floors and hushed voices. Their small group settled in a chilly hallway outside Courtroom B, joined by a few supportive neighbors who came to watch. Jacob arrived last, slipping through the doors with a solemn expression. He gave Nicole's grandfather a quick handshake, then stood at Nicole's side. The estate manager appeared soon after, accompanied by a polished woman in a tailored suit, Renwick's lead counsel. They avoided eye contact, bustling past Nicole's group to speak with a clerk. Nicole's nerves fluttered. She half expected the millionaire himself to stride in, towering over them with smug confidence, but he didn't appear. Perhaps he thought the matter beneath him, trusting hired professionals to secure his victory. When the bailiff called the case, everyone filtered into the courtroom. A stern-faced judge presided, glancing over documents with curt efficiency. Ms. Davenport outlined the history. The foals had been sold at a legitimate auction, were nursing back to health under Nicole's care, and showed marked improvement according to veterinary records. Renwick's counsel, in contrast, accused Nicole of having no rightful claim, saying the auction papers were a clerical mistake and that the foals had significant monetary and genetic value. Mr. Renwick seeks only to protect his property from potential harm, the lawyer declared. Nicole seethed at the word property, but Ms. Davenport maintained composure, calmly highlighting the extensive care given to the foals and dismissing any notion of harm. Dr. Lawson's statement confirmed their stellar condition, while Ms. Davenport also referenced community support as evidence of their stable, nurturing environment. Renwick's counsel then pushed for immediate relinquishment of the foals to a neutral facility, citing risks to valuable breeding lines. Nicole felt her grandfather stiffen beside her. Mrs. Davenport responded confidently, pointing to the numerous documents that proved the foals were thriving. Finally, the judge cleared his throat and issued a measured request for additional evidence, delaying the immediate handover. He set a date 2 weeks hence for a final ruling on Renwick's motion to remove the foals from Nicole's farm. Outside the courthouse, a wave of reporters and curious onlookers awaited. Nicole gripped Ember's halter rope. She'd brought it as a kind of symbolic comfort, even though the foals stayed safely at home. Mrs. Davenport addressed the crowd with careful words, assuring everyone that justice would prevail. Renwick's counsel made no comment, whisking the estate manager away to a waiting car. Nicole's mind spun with relief that the foals weren't being forcibly taken yet, but dread gnawed at her. 2 weeks was a short window. Another hearing loomed, and more attacks could come. That night, back at the farm, Nicole found it impossible to sleep. She padded outside under a cloudy sky, walking quietly to the paddock. The air was cold enough that she clutched her jacket tight. Peering over the fence, she could just make out the shapes of Sunny, Dash, and Ember, their gentle snorts forming soft clouds in the dim light. She unlatched the gate and slipped inside, letting them press close. Running her hand along Ember's neck, she whispered, "I promise I won't let them take you. We'll fight until the last breath," The chestnut nickered softly, as if answering her vow. Sunny flicked her ears, stepping closer, while Dash exhaled against Nicole's sleeve. Standing there under a silent sky, Nicole's anxiety slowly gave way to renewed determination. The hearing had been a blow, but it wasn't the end. This battle was about more than a piece of paper. It was about proving these horses deserved the second chance they'd been given. And they would keep fighting, one day at a time, until the court, or fate itself, forced a final outcome. In the tense days after the preliminary hearing, Nicole threw herself wholeheartedly into caring for Sunny, Dash, and Ember. Every spare moment revolved around boosting their strength and confidence, as though each success might fortify the case before the next court date arrived. She rose before dawn to feed and groom them, determined to show that her dedication was beyond question. And yet, a knot of dread wound ever tighter inside her chest, reminding her that a judge's ruling could unravel all she'd fought for. Autumn's chill seeped into the mornings, painting the pastures in muted grays at sunrise. Nicole's grandfather occasionally caught her standing at the paddock fence long after chores were done, lost in thought. Whenever he walked up and touched her shoulder, the worry in her eyes was unmistakable. "We're going to do our best," he always said. She'd nod, wanting to believe that effort alone would guarantee a happy ending. But doubt lingered in her silence. One evening, Miss Davenport called with an urgent request. "The judge wants additional clarity on the foal's breeding lines," she explained, voice taut with concern. "Apparently, Renwick's council is claiming these young horses are part of a rare bloodline. They insist that returning them to the estate is critical to preserve those genetics." Nicole nearly dropped the phone in exasperation. "They never cared about those lines before," she fumed. "They threw them out." Miss Davenport sympathized but pressed for more details. "We have to debunk their claim. If you have any proof that the foal's mother wasn't some prized broodmare, that would help. Otherwise, we need to argue that it doesn't matter. They're alive and well with you." This new angle spurred Nicole to investigate. She scoured every resource she could find, even returning to the auction house to speak with the stable hands who had loaded the foals. Most recalled little about their dam or her exact origins. However, one older worker, a wiry man named Ted, remembered a conversation he'd overheard. The mare had been of ordinary stock, brought to Renwick's estate purely to serve as a surrogate. If that rumor was true, it cast serious doubt on the breeding claims. Ted promised to sign an affidavit, though Nicole worried the defense might dismiss his account as hearsay. Still, anything that undermined Renwick's argument was worth pursuing. In the meantime, Jacob sensed Nicole's turmoil and tried to lighten the mood by introducing fun training exercises for the foals. He set up a small obstacle course with low rails and cones. Sunny trotted eagerly over each barrier, her golden tail swishing as she led the others. Dash navigated carefully, pausing once to sniff a bright orange cone. Ember hesitated at the unfamiliar shapes, but Nicole coaxed her forward, voice gentle and encouraging. Soon enough, the chestnut mare mustered the courage to follow her siblings. When they succeeded, the onlookers, neighbors and friends who had come to watch burst into applause. In those applause-filled moments, Nicole glimpsed a future where these horses might live free of legal threats, admired for their resilience rather than their bloodline. Hope rose further when Dr. Lawson dropped by unannounced one breezy afternoon, a broad smile creasing her face. "I just spoke to a colleague at the veterinary board," she told Nicole. "He's prepared to vouch for your care, based on all the documentation I've shared. It's not a legal ruling, but a statement from an official body can carry weight with the judge." Nicole felt a rush of gratitude. Each new ally reminded her that she and her grandfather weren't alone in standing up to Renwick's powerful estate. Perhaps public sentiment and expert testimony would prevail where logic and fairness alone might fail. But just as these rays of optimism pierced the gloom, another blow fell. One chilly morning, a large envelope arrived bearing the estate's legal letterhead. Inside were pages of documents accusing Nicole of unlicensed equine training and claiming she had exposed the foals to unnecessary risk at public events like the fundraiser. At first, she laughed at the absurdity. Her small demonstrations were hardly the same as formal training clinics, and the only risk was that the foals might balk at a tarp or spook at a camera flash. Yet her grandfather's face darkened when he read the fine print. "They're threatening to spin every good deed into a transgression," he murmured, slapping the pages onto the table. "We'll send these to Ms. Davenport. Let her untangle the nonsense." That night, Nicole fought to keep her composure as she reviewed the new allegations with Mr. Davenport over the phone. The attorney remained calm, assuring her that such tactics were standard in contentious cases. "It's a scare tactic. If they can't prove the foals were illegally purchased, they'll claim your care is inferior," she explained. "Stay consistent. Don't let them provoke an outburst that could be used against you in court." Before hanging up, Miss Davenport advised Nicole to gather more first-hand accounts from neighbors who had seen how gentle the training sessions were. "Every witness helps," she insisted. The following afternoon, a small group of supporters gathered near the paddock, folks who had attended the fundraiser, plus a few longtime family friends. They wrote brief statements describing how respectfully Nicole worked with the foals, emphasizing that no cruelty or negligence was ever apparent. One woman, a soft-spoken teacher, remembered how Ember had nestled against Nicole rather than shying away. "If a horse that young trusts someone that much, it speaks volumes," she wrote in neat handwriting. Nicole clutched these letters as though they were shields against every accusation. As the final hearing date loomed, Nicole's anxiety spiked. She tried to hide her worry from the foals, focusing on routine tasks, filling their water trough, cleaning hooves, and brushing out their coats. Sunny, Dash, and Ember sensed her agitation anyway. At times, they'd circle around her, pressing their muzzles against her arms. She'd respond by murmuring soft reassurances, hoping they understood. Every night, she said the same silent prayer that truth would triumph over greed, yet she couldn't silence the fear that Renwick's lawyers would conjure a cunning argument or manipulate the system in his favor. 2 days before the hearing, Ms. Davenport sent urgent word that Renwick might call a surprise witness, the estate's veterinarian. Though the estate manager had initially dismissed the foals as weaklings, now they claimed that the estate vet had recommended a more controlled environment for any at-risk young horses. Nicole clenched her fists at the irony. No one from Renwick's side had lifted a finger to help those foals when they lay helpless, but now they pretended to be protectors of equine welfare. Jacob and Nicole spent one last evening rehearsing how she might answer questions in court. "Don't get rattled," he reminded her, pacing the dusty barn floor. "Speak from the heart, but keep it factual. Stick to the records. And if they mock your experience, remember you're the one who's raised them from day one, not some high-paid lawyer." Nicole nodded, trying to imprint his advice in her mind. Her grandfather watched from a stool, arms folded across his chest. "We stand by you," he said quietly. "No matter how this goes, we know you did right by those foals." On the final day before the hearing, the skies turned slate gray, threatening rain. Nicole found a moment alone with Sunny, Dash, and Ember in the late afternoon. She led them from the paddock to a grassy clearing behind the barn, where she sometimes allowed them to roam on longer lead ropes. The wind rustled branches overhead, sending a few leaves tumbling around their hooves. Ember flinched at one swirling leaf, then glanced at Nicole for reassurance. With a trembling smile, Nicole stroked the foal's neck. "Tomorrow," she whispered, voice catching in her throat. "We'll prove you belong here." Sunny and Dash grazed shoulder to shoulder, calm despite the ominous weather. Perhaps they trusted that Nicole would protect them. Gazing at their strong forms, she tried to quell the storm within her own heart. She recalled the day she'd first laid eyes on them, feeble creatures, barely able to stand. Now they stood tall, warm breath misting the cool air, manes flicking in the wind. Their presence radiated a resilience no courtroom drama could erase. At dusk, Nicole's grandfather gently herded the foals back into the barn, aware that a cold drizzle had begun. He draped extra blankets on each of them, earning a grateful nicker from Ember. Upstairs in the farmhouse, Nicole forced herself to eat a light supper, though anxiety stole her appetite. She retreated to her room, carefully packing her evidence files and a small binder of photographs. Then she lay in bed, eyes on the ceiling, mind racing with possible outcomes. Would the judge see through Renwick's charade? Or would money and influence overshadow fairness? Sleep came fitfully. She dreamed of dark silhouettes leading the foals away, their frightened cries echoing in an empty stable. Then she jolted awake in the pre-dawn hush, heart pounding. Gathering her courage, she pulled on her boots and crept outside to check on them. In the barn, the three dozed peacefully. Nicole leaned over the stall door, whispering, "No matter what happens in that courtroom, I won't stop fighting for you." The horses shifted, ears flicking at her voice. If they could sense her fear, they didn't show it. In their quiet, steady presence, she found a measure of calm. By sunrise, she'd steeled herself for the battle ahead, resolved to confront whatever Renwick's legal team hurled at them. The morning of the final hearing broke under a sky streaked with soft pink and lingering grey. Nicole woke before her alarm, heart pounding at the thought that the fate of Sunny, Dash and Ember would soon be decided. Gathering every scrap of legal paperwork, she slipped into the barn to see them one last time before heading into town. They whickered gently, pressing their muzzles against her jacket as though sensing her nerves. She whispered promises of safety, then hurried back to the farmhouse to meet her grandfather and Jacob. When they arrived at the courthouse, a small crowd had formed outside, including neighbors holding signs that read, "Protect the Foals" and "Second chances matter." Nicole's chest tightened with gratitude. Even though her stomach was twisted with anxiety, she felt a swell of hope at their solidarity. Cameras flashed as they passed through the tall doors into the echoing lobby. She tried to stand tall, recalling Mrs. Davenport's advice to keep her composure. Inside the courtroom, tension ran high. Renwick himself was present this time, seated beside his attorney in a tailored suit that seemed more at home in a corporate boardroom than a rural courthouse. He offered Nicole only a cold glance before turning away, as though she were beneath his notice. The estate manager stood nearby, arms crossed. Mrs. Davenport leaned over to Nicole, murmuring, "Stick to the facts. Don't let his presence shake you." Nicole nodded, her palms damp despite the chill in the air. The proceeding began with Renwick's attorney contending that the foals were integral to a prestigious breeding program and that Nicole had obtained them through a miscommunication. She claimed that the estate had always intended to provide proper care but was thwarted by the auction house's error. Nicole swallowed her indignation as Ms. Davenport rose to counter these allegations. Calmly, she presented the original bill of sale, the veterinary reports, and affidavits from staff who witnessed the foal's arrival at auction. Each piece of evidence painted a starkly different picture. The three newborns were abandoned, overlooked, and sold for next to nothing. The judge thumbed through the documents with a measured frown, eyes flicking toward Renwick's side now and then. Mrs. Davenport called Dr. Lawson to testify next. The veterinarian spoke with steady conviction, detailing how Sunny, Dash, and Ember had been dangerously underweight and near death upon arrival at Nicole's rescue farm. Her voice rang with quiet authority as she confirmed that Nicole's diligent care had transformed them into strong, healthy youngsters. In my professional opinion, she concluded, removing them from their current environment would be detrimental. They've bonded with their caregiver and are thriving under her supervision. A ripple of murmurs passed through the gallery as Dr. Lawson stepped down. Renwick's attorney then introduced their own expert, the estate veterinarian, who claimed that proper ranch resources could better support the Foals lineage. Nicole listened, jaw tight, as he read from meticulously prepared notes about the potential value of horses carrying the mare's genetic traits. It felt surreal to hear them speak so reverently of breeding lines they hadn't bothered to protect when the foals were helpless. Beside Nicole, Jacob shifted with irritation, but Miss Davenport placed a cautionary hand on his arm. Finally, the judge asked to hear from Nicole directly. Her heart thudded as she made her way to the front, standing behind the witness table. She described finding the foals trembling in the auction pen, how she'd used her last bit of savings to buy them because no one else would. She spoke of midnight feedings, the delicate steps of training, and the blossoming personalities of Sunny, Dash, and Ember. She kept her voice steady, occasionally glancing at her grandfather for reassurance. They're not just future racehorses or breeding stock, she said, looking straight at the judge. They're living souls. They were weak and abandoned, and now they're family. Renwick's attorney tried to rattle her with pointed questions about the fundraiser and photos in the local news. She implied Nicole was exploiting the foals for personal gain and lacked the professional background to manage them. Ms. Davenport objected, calling attention to the volumes of data documenting how well the foals were doing. When asked directly if she intended to profit from them, Nicole shook her head, voice clear. All I ever wanted was to save them. If they grow strong enough to compete or excel, that's their accomplishment, not a scheme to make money. In the final moments, both sides delivered closing statements. Renwick's attorney insisted that a rightful return to the estate would ensure the foals' success, while Mrs. Davenport cited every scrap of evidence showing that Nicole's rescue had provided the stable environment they desperately needed. The judge said he would review the arguments and issue a decision within the hour. With that, everyone adjourned into the hallway, swirling with hushed conversation. Nicole stood near a window, gaze falling on the drizzle outside, trying to steady her trembling hands. She saw Renwick conferring with his lawyer, frustration etched in the tautness of his shoulders. Jacob and her grandfather moved close, quietly voicing optimism. Ms. Davenport offered Nicole a small, encouraging smile. Time dragged in excruciating slowness until the clerk summoned them back into the courtroom. The judge's words fell over the silent room like hammer blows. After reviewing the evidence, I find that the 3 foals were legally purchased by Miss Nicole Anders at a recognized auction. Furthermore, there is substantial proof that their well-being has improved under her care. Therefore, Mr. Renwick's motion to remove the foals from Miss Anders's custody is denied. A wave of relieved murmuring swept the benches. The judge continued, unless new, compelling information emerges, the court recognizes Miss Anders as the legitimate owner of Sunny, Dash, and Ember. Nicole clasped a hand over her mouth, tears of relief welling in her eyes. Her grandfather let out a breath he'd been holding, nodding vigorously. Jacob flashed a grin and clapped her on the shoulder. Across the aisle, Renwick scowled, his attorney's expression stony. In a final blow to their claim, the judge advised that any further harassment would risk contempt of court. Renwick rose, smoothing his suit coat with a stiff motion, and walked out without a word. In the corridor, Reporters converged. Ms. Davenport shielded Nicole from the barrage of questions, offering a brief statement. We're grateful the court affirmed that compassion and proper care matter more than monetary interests. Nicole only managed a tearful smile, hugging her grandfather and Jacob as cameras flashed. A wave of supporters, neighbors, and even strangers clapped and offered congratulations. She felt dazed, heart pounding with disbelief that they had won. They drove home under a sky that was finally clearing. Sunbeams broke through drifting clouds, painting the farm's fields in golden light. As soon as Nicole stepped out of the truck, she rushed to the paddock. Sunny, Dash, and Ember raised their heads, as if expecting good news. She slipped between the rails, letting them crowd around her, pressing soft muzzles to her shoulders. "You're safe," she murmured, voice thick with tears. "No one can take you now." The three foals nickered, as though echoing her relief. In the months that followed, Renwick's estate remained conspicuously silent, likely licking its wounds from the public embarrassment. Life settled into something like normalcy, though Nicole felt forever changed by the ordeal. She continued training the foals, marveling at their swift progress. By the next spring, Sunny's boldness hinted she might one day excel in show jumping. Dash's even temperament suggested a future in dressage or trail competitions. Ember, the shyest, began revealing extraordinary agility that made Jacob wonder if she might shine in cross-country events. Word spread among local equestrians that Nicole's rescued foals possessed rare heart and spirit. Though she resisted the pressure to rush them into serious competition, she eventually accepted a friendly invitation to a small horse show in the summer. All three performed with a grace that belied their humble origins. Sunny, in particular, cleared a modest jump course flawlessly, ears pricked forward with radiant confidence. The crowd clapped for the miracle trio, once scorned as worthless but now stepping into the spotlight on their own terms. After the show, Nicole found a quiet corner to pat Ember's neck. The chestnut's eyes glowed with trust, and for a moment, Nicole recalled those feeble days in the barn when Ember shook at every strange sound. She felt a surge of gratitude that soared above any ribbon or trophy. It wasn't about winning titles or proving Renwick wrong. It was about the bond forged in the face of adversity, the steadfast belief that weak creatures can grow strong with the right care and love. By the end of summer, invitations to bigger events poured in, though Nicole chose carefully, never wanting to push the foals too fast. She found genuine joy watching them discover their talents. At one local competition, spectators remarked on how proud they looked, how their coats gleamed like polished copper and gold. She couldn't help but think back to that day at the auction when all the world saw were shaky legs and drooping heads. Now they were living, breathing proof that no creature should be discarded just because the odds seem grim. Standing at the paddock gate one afternoon, Nicole smiled as she watched Sunny, Dash, and Ember romp across the pasture. Hooves thundered in playful pursuit, manes tossing under the bright sun. Her grandfather ambled over, resting a hand on the fence. "You saved them," he said gently. And in some ways, they saved us too, reminding us that no challenge is impossible when you've got enough heart. Nicole nodded, tears pricking her eyes at the memory of everything they had endured. As dusk fell, Nicole slipped into the barn to say goodnight. She offered each foal a gentle stroke and whispered final words of gratitude for the victory they had won together. In the soft glow of the stable lights, Sunny nuzzled her shoulder, Dash stood calm and steady, and Ember exhaled a slow, satisfied breath. The future stretched wide before them, promising new trails to explore, new hurdles to leap, But no matter where that path led, the bond they shared would remain unbreakable, a testament to what unwavering faith and kindness could achieve. Nicole turned off the lights and stepped outside under a sky ablaze with fading oranges and purples. The battle was over, and they had emerged stronger on the other side. Tomorrow, she would resume their gentle training and perhaps plan for the next show. But tonight, she let herself savor this moment of peace and triumph. The three foals were hers forever, champions of a destiny they had shaped together, a destiny no amount of wealth or cruelty could tear away.